You probably found this video because you've been wrestling with the idea of upgrading your studio monitors. Do you really think that buying better speakers are going to help you mix better and make your songs sound like a professional recording studio? Is it all marketing, or is there some truth to upgrading your speakers and getting better mixing results? For me personally, it felt impossible to make a decision on if I should upgrade and what speakers to upgrade to because as you look online, everybody argues over what monitors are the best sounding, and there's so much contradictory information out there. In fact, it took me almost 10 years to pull the trigger and upgrade my Dynaudio BM5as to Genelec 8030s. But after I made the switch and when I was doing some testing in my studio, I discovered something that I thought I would share with you because I think it's super important and not a lot of people, if anyone, has ever mentioned this. It's certainly something that I didn't expect. In this video today, I'm so excited to share with you what this discovery was and some advice and recommendations if you're thinking about upgrading your studio monitors or if you're just trying to pick up your first pair. And as I mentioned, a lot of this advice and recommendations I haven't heard from other people, so I'm going to present some experiments that I've done and give you all the information and allow you to make your own conclusions on if you should upgrade your speakers or not. Be sure to watch until the end because this video is packed full of really good advice and recommendations for anyone that has a home studio. Hope you're having an amazing day. My name is Bobby Balo, and I'm the mixing and mastering engineer at Raytown Productions, and I help home studio owners and bedroom producers make better sounding music without needing to buy expensive audio equipment or gear. If you're new to my channel, thank you so much for being here. I drop new videos on mixing and mastering every single week, so be sure to hit that subscribe button so you get notified when a new video gets released. And because we're on the topic of studio upgrades, I have an awesome gift for you. I made a PDF that you can download absolutely free. It has my recommended studio monitors, interfaces, cables, and if it's important for you to get a good sound out of your home studio, I have it in this guide. So there's a link in the description. Be sure to check that out and download it if you need some recommendations or suggestions. So when I made my decision to upgrade my monitors, there was a few reasons why, and what I found out after looking back on it is that it all boiled down to one thing, and that is the fear of missing out. And I just wasn't sure if my speakers were really limiting my ability to mix and master music. Online, people say crazy things about how monitors will change their life and how their mixes are all of a sudden transformed and they can hear so much more clarity. So it's really easy to get caught up in this mentality that if we don't upgrade our monitors, we're going to be left behind. I mix and master music all the time for my clients, and the vast majority of the time, they're really happy with what they receive. So there's no indication that my mixes were deficient, but I still felt this overwhelming need to upgrade my monitors. So here are the reasons why I decided to upgrade my speakers. So the first reason was I wasn't sure if the speakers I had were self-compressing when I was mixing and mastering music. And what that means is basically at some point the speakers themselves are compressing the music as we perceive it, so it's hard to dial in the right amount of dynamics with a compressor or limiter. And I couldn't find any information online about if my speakers self-compress or not, so I figured they weren't good enough. The second reason why I decided to upgrade my monitors was because I thought maybe the EQ wasn't flat enough. Because I did a room sweep analysis and I saw that in some spots it was like 6 dB louder in certain spots and 6 dB quieter. So how could I possibly get a good mix if my speakers aren't very flat? And the last reason why I thought I needed to upgrade was because the Dynaudio BM5a uses a bass reflex design, and lots of people on the internet say that that can cause what's called a port resonance, so you get a blurring of the low frequency information based on the resonant frequency of those speakers. And that sounds pretty important to me. I tend to mix a lot of pop and rap music, which is bass heavy, and I also do a lot of rock and metal music as well, and you need to really get a good kick-bass relationship. And if I have something that's ringing or resonating in that bass frequency range, that I thought could cause some serious problems. So that's why I wanted to upgrade. So if any of that sounds familiar, I totally know your pain. So I decided to come up with a budget, and I said, you know what? I've been doing this for over 10 years. It's time to really get serious about this. And I said, I will buy speakers up to about $5,000, which is crazy that I would take on that much debt over this unknown situation that I may or may not have. And after I got these new Genelecs in, I'm really glad that I did not spend that much money because these were only about $550 each. which is still a lot of money, but a lot less than $5,000. And throughout this whole process, the first thing I learned was that you can't really know how a set of speakers are going to sound unless they're in your exact room on the stands that you're going to be using. You could read 1,000 reviews, and without actually hearing them in your room, it's kind of like randomly selecting a studio monitor. And I contacted a lot of local dealers to try to figure out a way that I could buy these speakers and try out a few pairs to find the best ones for me, and no one was willing to work with me on a return policy. And that makes sense because it's a big investment for a company to just send you speakers to try out and then return the ones you don't want. And for a lot of people, it's not even realistic anyways. So I decided to just fly blind. Maybe not the best decision, but I think it kind of worked out. So we are in my acoustically treated home studio. It's in a spare bedroom. It's not very big. And in addition to having acoustically treated panels that are 6 inches thick all over my room and bass traps in the corner, I also use room correction software, specifically SonarWorks. But you can also use other ones. I know IK Multimedia has one called the Arc 3 system. So check that out. I have a link to those in the description. What the EQ correction software does is it's going to correct for what your room does to your studio monitors that you just bought. Depending on the geometry and the reflections and bass trapping and the position of the speakers in the room, you can get a lot of unwanted cancellation and stuff that will make your perfectly flat speakers have a lot of big dips in the frequency spectrum. So the software will go and offset that by adding EQ in all these specific spots to try to get a really flat sound for you. And then that EQ is put on top of anything that comes out of your speakers so that everything that comes out is in theory flattened and corrected depending on your room. And this is something that no speaker manufacturer can guess because everybody's environment is different. So you really have to do a little bit of this work yourself, buy some room correction software, or there's some free versions available, and do the correction. So let's get into some experiments, shall we? So I wanted to see if there was really a big difference between the Dynaudio BM5as that I've been mixing on for 10 years and these new Genelec 8030s. So I didn't have a magical way of doing this, so I set up a pair of condenser mics and pointed them at the acoustic centers of the speakers, and then I played music from the speakers into the mics. Now, I know this is not a scientifically sound way of doing it, but I think this is a good way of showing the differences and what you can expect if you were to buy new studio monitors and bring them into a home studio environment. So there are some differences between speaker height. So again, this is not a perfect test, but I've moved the microphones around a little bit just to see if there's a huge impact to the sound, and there really wasn't that big of a difference. So I really truly think that these experiments I'm about to show you give you a good indication of how the speakers sound in the room. And I was really surprised at how different they sounded when the specifications from the manufacturers were so similar, especially in terms of flatness of the frequency response. So here we have a comparison between the different monitors, so my old Dynaudio BM5as and then the new Genelec 8030cs. And I'm just going to show you how they sound in my particular room when we switch back and forth between the different recordings I did using those two condenser microphones. So this is the song that I played on the speakers. And then we have a big chorus that has this big rock out part. Your words are poisonous to me. So I played this track, and then we recorded the sound coming out of the speakers. So let's jump between the two. So the first one's the Genelec speakers. The second is the Dynaudio BM5as. So let's listen to that. I think it's pretty clear that those Dynaudios have this like really scoop sound, and the Genelec sounded pretty flat throughout. Let's go to the chorus. You can really hear how hyped the Dynaudios are. But it's very obvious that there's a very big difference between the Genelecs and the Dynaudios. Now, what I want to show you that was really surprising to me was how much the room EQ straightened out the differences between the Genelecs and the Dynaudios. So here are the Genelecs with SonarWorks and then Dynaudio. Sounds pretty similar. Let's go back just so you can remember what it sounded like before that room correction. So it's pretty impressive, right? Let's check out the chorus. This is going to be a lot more noticeable. So you can hear, I mean, even on the chorus, the difference is a little bit more noticeable, but in general, the room EQ corrected monitors are so much closer. I think an important point that I want to mention is that, yes, there are differences after we've corrected them, but in general, the major flaws in the speakers as they interact with the home studio are corrected. So as long as you're doing your due diligence in referencing and checking your mixes and learning to understand how the songs are going to translate with this new corrected profile, it's going to be a lot easier for you to make the right mixing and mastering decisions that are going to translate everywhere. But if you have something that's fundamentally flawed, like in the uncorrected samples that I have, it's really hard to dial in and make adjustments when you're mixing and mastering when you have these large peaks and valleys all over the place. You're kind of flying blind, and it's more of a guessing game compared to if you use room correction in your monitoring system. So to be totally honest, I think I would probably be able to get really good mixes and masters using either of these speakers. So the upgrade that I did might not necessarily have been really beneficial. I think what's way more important than buying new speakers is to correct your room and acoustically treat it. That's going to get you into an amazing starting position that allows you to mix and master more effectively. Buying speakers based on hype is not a good strategy, and I don't recommend doing that. So let's answer some of those questions that I had earlier that made me upgrade my monitors in the first place. So in terms of self-compression, I don't think I could reliably choose which speaker sounded more compressed than the other. I'd be willing to bet that if you start really pushing these speakers like close to 95, maybe 100 decibels, like something really loud, something where you would never be mixing or mastering music at that level, then maybe you might be able to hear some differences in compression with the speakers. But for my experience, it sounded more like the differences in the transient response were really related to the flatness of the speaker or the EQ shape rather than some sort of driver performance. So that one was kind of a wash. I shouldn't have upgraded. So the next reason why I upgraded my monitors was because I didn't think the frequency balance was flat enough. And I will say the Genelecs really shined in this region. They were way more flat than the Dynaudios were. But because these speakers are in a room, it's going to generate all sorts of dips and boosts in different parts. And even though the Genelecs were really flat and still a better starting point than the Dynaudios, I still think that they needed some sort of room EQ correction to really get consistently good mixes and masters. So I would still highly recommend EQing these speakers. And as you saw from the demonstration, after EQ, they sounded a lot more similar to the Dynaudios. So I can't recommend it enough, but check out SonarWorks or Arc 3 system by IK Multimedia. And the last belief that I had about this port resonance thing that would blur the low frequency region of the speakers, that didn't seem to do anything. That being said, after the Genelecs and the Dynaudios were EQ corrected, I don't think there was any issue with my low bass region that would be affecting my mixes or masters. So all in all, these Genelec 8030s did sound a lot better than the Dynaudios right out the gate, but after EQ correction, I think the differences were pretty marginal. I will say, though, that the sonic image was very different in the Genelecs versus the Dynaudios. The Genelecs, there was a much more three-dimensional feel to the music, and the sweet spot was a lot larger. Now, I don't really think that that spatial imaging is really going to affect anybody's ability to mix or master music very much, but it does make listening to music pretty awesome. So let's talk about some recommendations for you since you're the one that's interested in upgrading your speakers or getting a good pair. So first things first, before you buy new speakers, be sure to take the time to acoustically treat your room. You don't need to do the whole thing. You don't need to build a new studio. Just try to take care of your primary reflection points. I talk about this in more detail with one of my videos about why mixes don't translate. So if you're interested, you can check that out. If your room is just a giant mess or there's no way for you to treat your walls because you live in an apartment or something, then what I would actually recommend is instead of buying monitors, maybe you should consider buying a better set of headphones. And that sounds kind of crazy, but a lot of really top mixing and mastering engineers mix and master music out of headphones. They just don't broadcast that to everybody. It can definitely be done, and I've done it myself. I have some really awesome suggestions for headphones that you might find really helpful in that free PDF. So if you haven't gone and downloaded it yet, go check out the description for a link. So my next recommendation is after you've acoustically treated your space a little bit, definitely look into using EQ correction for your room. Yes, I know some of the systems are a little bit more expensive. It's going to be cheaper than monitors, and I think you're going to get way better results by fixing your room response instead of upgrading to new speakers. I showed you in the video that the uncorrected version of the speakers sounded way different. And after you do the room correction, it might just fix the problems that you've been having with your mixes, and so you might not even need to upgrade at all. My next recommendation, if you mix pop, dance, rap, any of that type of music that is bass heavy, instead of getting better monitors, you might want to consider adding a subwoofer if you haven't done that yet. It doesn't need to be a huge subwoofer. I used a 10-inch KRK subwoofer for a really long time, and it definitely helped extend the low end of my monitors to a region where I could really hear and feel the bass response for these types of bass heavy music. That is going to make a way bigger difference to your ability to mix and master music compared to a better set of speakers, unless you're buying speakers that will extend to these sub-frequencies. But I found over time that adding a subwoofer just sounds better in a lot of home studio scenarios than using speakers by themselves. Something else I recommend is to get a sub that has a built-in crossover network. That way you can send the signal from your subwoofer to your monitors, and it will take care of all the crossovers for you automatically. So if you've decided, you know what, I'm going to buy new monitors, I don't care what Bobby said, that's totally cool. Just do your best to figure out a way to get a pair of monitors into your exact studio space and set them up as you're going to use them. You can sit there in Guitar Center or whatever music store and listen to all these different speakers, but it's never going to sound the same once you bring them into your studio. Try to find a company that has a good return policy so if it doesn't work out or if you can't really get the sound you're going for, that you can always have a way to return them. My last recommendation is to try to find speakers that might not have any major design flaws in them. So where do you find out if a speaker has a design flaw? There's a really awesome forum that I go to all the time. It's called audiosciencereview.com. And it's a community of people that literally analyze every aspect of studio monitors so you can compare all their findings to each other. And so I go there to find out if a pair of speakers that I'm interested in has any significant flaws that might make it difficult to fix using room correction. All the speakers on there are given a number that ranks them, so it's easy to compare which ones are the most well-designed and provide the flattest frequency response. And because it's all measurement-based, it's an unbiased review, which is very helpful. So there you go. I hope this video was helpful. Be sure to go and download your copy of the Home Studio Buyer's Guide that I have in the description. That's going to help give you some price points and some good gear recommendations if you're trying to get better speakers or just get started in general. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe button because I release new videos every single week. And if you smash that thumbs up button, that tells YouTube that this video is actually helpful and it's going to show it to more people. So I'd really appreciate it if you would do that. I want to sincerely thank you for your time and attention today, and I hope to see you in another video.